Daniel chapter 11 is probably one of the most confusing chapters to most readers. It's long, first of all, very long, and reading through this chapter makes people wondering what's going on, partly because it tells about a history that we are not that much aware of anymore. Welcome to yet another tidbit from the book of Daniel. As mentioned, we have come to Daniel 11. To understand Daniel 11, we first have to repeat what I told last time, that this long oral prophecy in chapter 11 is framed on both sides, in chapter 10 and 12, by heavenly conversations. Through these heavenly appearances, these dialogues, Daniel is told and shown what's going on behind the scenes of earthly history. There is a great battle in history, but there is something more going on behind the scenes. There is a spiritual battle between good and evil, represented by Michael, the mighty prince of the people of God, and his spiritual enemies. The earthly history, as confusing as it looks, can be understood on the basis of that struggle, that great controversy between good and evil. Now, as you look at the prophecy in chapter 11, we have to note this is not a vision in the traditional sense of watching symbolic presentation. This is orally told. That's why it's called an oral dynastic prophecy. And the genre of it is somewhat similar to what we find in Assyrian and Babylonian royal annals, where you also have prophecies. And that leads to some reflection on the similarities between these prophecies and this one in Daniel. There is at least one major similarity beyond the oral type, that is the references to the corners of the world. Babylonian or Mesopotamian divination, when given to the kings to tell them about their possible future, would always refer to the four corners of the world where the enemies would come from, enemy kingdoms: east and west, north and south. And this is exactly what you have in Daniel as well. In chapter 8, the powers shown in vision would come from directions of the four corners of the world. And here in chapter 11, this is also the case. It begins very briefly with a battle between someone coming from west and east, and it actually ends with an east-west confrontation again. But then its focus is on kings from the north and from the south. Now, the usage is evidently symbolic. When you look at a map of ancient Israel, you will find that the enemies attacking the land of Israel would always come from either north or from the south. Even enemies that might have their location eastwards, that is in Mesopotamia, would not travel through the desert, but through the northern Mesopotamia, arrive from the north down into the area of Palestine. That could be Assyria, later Babylon, and from the south they would meet the great king of the south, that is the king of Egypt. And that historical background is also the background of Daniel 11. The symbolic value of these kingdoms, of Babylonia especially, and Egypt, are represented by the kings of north and south throughout the book, or the chapter of Daniel, chapter 11. But as you go through the chapter, you would also realize that this chapter is expanding on the previous visions. a lot of expressions that you find in chapter 8 in particular are repeated in chapter 11. This is not a completely new version. This is simply an expansion, an elaboration of what you have already seen or met in the previous visions. What is then the highlight? Now, Dr. Dukang has, in his recent book on Daniel 11, shown a chiastic structure. That is, a structure where you can find a center in the middle, and that center you find in 11:22. So let me read this chapter, verse 11:22, this verse. It said, "Armies shall be utterly swept away before him," speaking about one of these kings, "and broken, even the prince of the covenant." This particular expression is unique and points to a unique figure. In the book of Daniel, there are two words used for prince: Sar and Nagid. In this case, it is Nagid. That is the one you also find in the prophecy in Daniel 9:25-27, when Messiah is cut off, the Anointed One. Nagid refers to the prince in earthly mundane terms. The other term that is used, Sar, is the prince of princes, Sar Sarim, or it is the prince of the army, Sar Ha-Tzabah. That is the heavenly figure, the high priest of the people of God. So you have here, in a context where you have the heavenly figure, Michael, the prince of princes, the prince of the people of God, mentioned under both sides of the large vision. You have then in the middle, you have the Nagid, that is the same person as the human who suffers and dies without anyone helping him, coming to his aid. That is the crucifixion of Jesus Christ. Understanding this chapter, you have to understand the central role of the Prince of the Covenant, that is Jesus Christ. Interpreting the terms, you have to reject the literalistic reading that takes what is symbolic to be geographic. The geographic mention here is symbolic. The people of God are those who follow Christ. The northern and the southern kingdom are representing forces of false religion and atheism, godlessness. They are not in literal terms to be interpreted as the king of Babylon or the king of Egypt down to the end of time. And down to the end of time, the chapter leads us. From verse 28 to 39, you have a section that is mostly interested in the spiritual aspect of the persecutions that take place through history, and which leads us down to the Day of Atonement, mentioned as the appointed time, the Hebrew word moed. And then you have the end time battle from verse 40 and onwards, which will climax in the next chapter, because the first verses of chapter 12 are still part of the oral prophecy. And it is told this way: "At that time shall arise Michael, the great prince, who has charge of your people." So Michael will stand up to defend his people, and the defense here could be seen as, of course, actual defense in the time of persecution, but it is also the defense in the court of God. He is the heavenly representative, the defender of the people in the court of God against the accusations by the devil. He is also the one who is redeeming, delivering them, because he is the one who not only is the Sarim, the Prince of Princes in heaven, the high priest, he is also the Nagid, the one who suffered and died as the Anointed One, the Prince of the Covenant. Thank you for listening to this tidbit from Daniel 11, and welcome back to the final tidbit from the book of Daniel when we look at the last chapter, Daniel 12.